Kind girl helps poor trash collector. Turns out he's Billionaire, CEO's grandpa, and her unexpected matchmaker. He ate from a stranger's leftovers. No name, no wallet, just a trembling hand around a bowl of soup someone else didn't finish. She saw him there, shivering in the rain, and gave him her only meal without hesitation. No questions, no judgment. Not knowing that tomorrow the mansion gates would open and the man in the gates would remember her face forever. The soup that changed everything. Rain had a way of making the world feel invisible. It slid down window panes and pooled in alley gutters, washing over cigarette butts and yesterday's dreams like they never mattered. In a quiet corner of Oakland, under the flickering light behind Pete's Hardware, a small soup cart kept its flame alive. Barely. Cassie Monroe stirred the pot, her fingers numb from the cold, her sleeves soaked through. The air smelled of salt and star anise, steam fogging her glasses as she ladled out the broth. Her little boy Milo was curled up on a milk crate behind her, scribbling comic book sketches on the back of used napkins. Dinner hour had passed, so had lunch. The few bills she'd made that day sat damp in a coffee. She was about to close up when she saw him. Bent over near the trash bin, arms trembling, was a man who looked like he belonged to another century. His coat was threadbare, his shoes wrapped in grocery bags. He was lifting a used takeout container toward his mouth, hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the fork steady. "Sir," Cassie called out gently. "You hungry?" The man didn't speak, just looked up with eyes so clouded they seemed to carry decades of storms. He nodded once, silent, ashamed. Cassie glanced at the pot. Just one bowl left. It was supposed to be theirs, hers and Milo's. But something inside her, something that had nothing to do with logic, wouldn't let her keep it. "Come here," she said, already filling the cup. "It's still hot." He shuffled over, wordless. Cassie handed him the soup with both hands like it was something sacred. He tried to say thank you, but the words caught in his throat. Milo peeked over the counter. "Mommy? Who is he?" "Someone who's cold," Cassie whispered. The old man drank slowly, savoring every sip like it was gold. When he was done, he looked at her. Really looked, and something passed between them. Not pity, not charity, and recognition. He fumbled with his coat, then paused, slipping something from inside the lining. A cufflink. Gold, slightly tarnished, it bore the initials J.W. He pressed it into her hand. "I don't need anything," Cassie began. But he was already gone. She stood there for a moment, watching the rain swallow his silhouette. Then she turned to Milo. "Let's go home, baby." That night, she tucked her son in beside her on the mattress they shared, still wearing her damp clothes, the cufflink on the nightstand like a question mark. She didn't know who he was, or why her heart ached like it did, only that something about the way he drank that soup made her feel seen. The next morning, a black car waited outside their apartment. Cassie rubbed her eyes. It wasn't real. Couldn't be. No one came to this neighborhood in town cars unless someone had died or won the lottery. She opened the door cautiously, bracing herself. A man in a gray suit stepped out, tall, polite, distant. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. "Mr. Whitaker requests your presence for breakfast." She blinked. "Who?" The man reached into his pocket and held out something small, a second cufflink, identical to the one she still kept on her nightstand. Cassie didn't speak. Her heart felt like it had dropped through her rib cage. "Mr. Joseph Whitaker would like to thank you in person," the man added. "He rarely asks for anything. We advise you come." Milo peeked out from behind her, clutching his sketch pad. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Cassie swallowed. "I don't think so, baby." They dressed in silence. Her only coat was still damp, and Milo's shoes had holes in the toes. But she tucked in his shirt, brushed his curls, and held his hand tightly as the door closed behind them. Inside the limousine, the world changed. Leather seats, silent drivers, windows that shut out the noise of the city. Cassie kept her arms wrapped around Milo the entire time, watching the buildings turn from cracked bricks to glass and They passed through iron gates so tall they looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. At the center of the manicured lawn stood the Whitaker estate, marble steps, carved archways, and pillars tall enough to hold up the sky. A butler waited at the door. Inside, the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls and polished wood wrapped around them like an embrace. Milo stared wide-eyed at the chandelier overhead. And then, seated at the end of a long mahogany table, sipping tea as if the world had never broken him, was the man from the alley. Clean-shaven, hair combed back, in a perfectly tailored suit. Joseph Whitaker, and one of the wealthiest men on the West Coast. He looked up at her and smiled like he'd been expecting her his whole life. "You gave me something yesterday," he said, voice soft. "Today, I return the favor." Chapter 1. The noodles she gave away. The first time Joseph Whitaker tasted her soup, he hadn't spoken in over 2 days. He didn't speak much at all anymore. Not since the accident, not since his mind had started to fold into itself, like old paper softening at the edges. Names disappeared, places blurred, but hunger, that was something he still understood. The cold had been brutal that week, the kind that snuck into your bones and built a nest. Joseph had wandered the alleys of East Oakland in his tattered coat, the one no one recognized anymore, the same coat that once brushed against billion-dollar boardroom doors. Now, it dragged through puddles. He found the soup cart by accident. The steam drifting from its silver lid smelled like memory, like his mother's kitchen in rural Kentucky, like autumn Sundays before things got complicated. He stood beside a stack of milk crates and watched. The girl behind the cart couldn't have been more than 25. Stringy brown hair tied back in a frayed elastic, flour smudged on her cheek. She wore fingerless gloves and spoke softly, mostly to the little boy behind her who was coloring on a pizza box. Joseph's stomach growled. He didn't have $1 to his name, his pockets were lined with lint and a spare button. But still, he stepped closer. She noticed. "Hey there, sir," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Cold out, huh?" He nodded. "I'm about to close," she added, "but I've got one last cup." Joseph looked at her hands, thin, red from the wind. Her lips were chapped, her shoes damp. She couldn't afford to give anything away. And yet she was already ladling the broth. She handed it over like it was nothing. But to him, it was everything. Steam curled from the cup as he sipped. It was simple broth, chicken bones, garlic, ginger, star anise, but it was warm and made with love. That part he could taste. That part didn't fade with age or dementia. The girl leaned on the counter, elbows bent, chin resting in her palm. "You remind me of my grandpa," she said softly. "Before he passed, he used to love my soup too." Joseph looked up. For a flicker of a moment, through the fog in his brain, he saw her clearly. Saw the sadness in her smile. Saw the boy behind her drawing a superhero labeled, "Mommy's Soup Saves the World." He reached into his coat and pulled out the only thing he had left from his old life, a cufflink. Gold, engraved with the initials J.W. It had been his father's, then his, passed down like a crown. He pressed it into her palm. She blinked. "I can't take this." But he had already turned to leave. Cassie Monroe didn't know why the gift shook her. She stood in the alley for a long time after he left, holding the cufflink in her hand. It was heavy, real gold probably, and strange, the kind of thing you'd find in an antique store for a ridiculous price. It didn't match the old man's clothes, or his eyes. Milo tugged at her jacket. "Mommy, you didn't eat." "I wasn't hungry," she lied, like she always did. They walked the few blocks home, past the broken streetlights and the liquor store where the man with 2 teeth always waved. Their apartment was a converted garage that still smelled like oil when it rained. She unlocked the door. Inside, they peeled off their wet layers. She warmed up canned beans and made toast, then watched Milo fall asleep with his superhero sketchbook clutched to his chest. She placed the cufflink on her nightstand. Something about the way he had looked at her before he walked away, it stayed with her. Not like a stranger, more like a grandfather, like someone who had once had everything and just needed to be reminded of something good. She didn't expect to see him again. The next morning, the rain had cleared and the air smelled like wet pavement and jasmine. Cassie wiped down the soup cart, humming softly. Business was slow. It always was. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel when the black car pulled up. It didn't belong here, sleek and silent, windows so dark they looked like mirrors. Cassie's heart jumped into her throat. Cars like that didn't come to this street unless someone owed someone else a very bad favor. The driver stepped out first, dressed in gray, neat, emotionless. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. She nodded, uncertain. "I believe you're acquainted with Mr. Joseph Whitaker." "I don't," she started. Then he held out his hand. In his palm was the twin of the cufflinks she'd received last night. She froze. "When Mr. Whitaker would like to invite you to breakfast, it's important." Milo tugged at her sleeve again. "Is he the man from the noodles, Mommy?" Cassie's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, baby, I think he is." She didn't know how they ended up here. In a car that smelled like cedarwood, driving through streets lined with roses, in a house with gates so wide they could fit her entire neighborhood. But when she stepped into the foyer of the Whitaker estate, when she looked up at the grand chandelier and saw Joseph waiting in a navy blazer, eyes clearer than before, she understood. This wasn't about soup. It was about something else. Something bigger. He smiled as she entered, holding a chair out for her. And for the first time in years, Cassie Monroe, the girl with the soup cart and the little boy who dreamed of superheroes, sat down at a table where she didn't have to ask permission to belong. Chapter 2. The Man in the Limousine. Cassie had never walked on marble floors before. She didn't know if she was supposed to take off her shoes or walk slower, or somehow pretend like she didn't notice the chandelier over her head looked like it belonged in a museum. Her hand tightened around Milo's as they followed the silent butler through a hallway so long it echoed. Everything smelled like lemon polish and money. "Mommy," Milo whispered. "This isn't a house, it's a castle." Cassie gave a nervous laugh. "Maybe just a really big house, baby." She didn't dare correct him, not when the windows stretched 2 stories tall and the paintings on the walls had gold nameplates underneath them. She'd seen houses like this in magazines, never in real life, certainly not as a guest. They were led into a sun-drenched breakfast room. French doors opened onto a manicured garden lined with rose bushes taller than her. In the center of the table was a silver tea set and a man she barely recognized except for his eyes. "Miss Monroe," Joseph Whitaker said, rising slowly from his chair. He looked sharper today, shaved, dressed, clearer, but his hands still trembled slightly when he held out her chair. His gaze, however, was unwavering. "Please sit." Cassie hesitated. She wanted to speak, to ask why they were here, why a man she thought was homeless was now seated like royalty in a room she didn't belong in. But Milo's fingers tugged at hers again, and she sat. He crawled into the chair beside her, eyes wide with curiosity. "I owe you an apology," Joseph said gently, his voice softer than the clinking of the silverware. "And a thank you." "I don't understand," Cassie murmured. "Who are you?" Joseph smiled. "Once upon a time, I built buildings, offices, hotels, airports, but none of that matters now." He poured her tea with shaky hands. "What matters is what I saw yesterday. A young woman with kindness in her eyes, who gave up her only meal without asking for anything in return. That hasn't happened to me in decades." "I didn't do it for anything," Cassie replied quickly, her voice defensive. "He looked hungry, that's all." "That's exactly why you matter." She paused, unsure what to say. Her heart was pounding. Joseph turned toward Milo. "And this little man is your son?" Milo grinned. "I draw superheroes." "I thought so." Joseph chuckled. "You look like the kind of boy who saves the world." Then the door opened, and he walked in. Cassie had never seen anyone like him. Tall, clean-cut, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than her food cart. His hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp enough to draw blood. He had the kind of presence that made people stand up straighter, not out of respect, but out of instinct. He paused when he saw them. His eyes, ice green and unreadable, flicked from Joseph to Cassie, then to Milo. "Grandfather," he said curtly, "you summoned me?" "I did," Joseph said calmly. "Grayson, this is Cassie Monroe and her son Milo. They gave me dinner yesterday, the kind of dinner that actually mattered." Cassie stood quickly, unsure of protocol. "I didn't know who he was. I just—" Grayson raised a hand to stop her. "You gave soup to a stranger and—" He studied her, not with warmth, not even with suspicion, just a cold, calculating stare that felt like he was trying to read every chapter of her life in one glance. "I didn't do it for money," she said, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. "If that's what you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything," he said flatly, "just surprised." Joseph cleared his throat. "I brought you here because I wanted you both to meet. Cassie isn't like the women you date, Grayson." Grayson's jaw tensed. "Because she's not wearing heels and doesn't have a publicist? Because she has something you've forgotten how to recognize." Joseph leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Real kindness." Cassie stood slowly. "Maybe we should go." "No," Joseph said quickly. "Stay, please. I haven't had company like this in a long time." Grayson turned away from them, pouring himself coffee in silence. The tension in the room thickened like fog. "Miss Monroe," he said at last without looking at her, "what do you want from us?" Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Nothing." "You're here. At my grandfather's estate, with my name now attached to yours. That's not nothing." Joseph slammed his cup down. "Grayson—" But Cassie didn't flinch. She stepped forward, eyes sharp. "You want the truth?" she said, fire lighting beneath her exhaustion. "I gave your grandfather soup because he was hungry. I didn't know who he was, and I sure as hell didn't expect a limo outside my apartment this morning." Grayson didn't blink. "I've spent the last 2 years trying to survive," she continued. "Selling soup for tips, raising a little boy on my own. I didn't come here to be accused." And then Milo, small and brave, piped up. "Mommy's soup saved his heart," she told me. Grayson finally looked down at the child. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Regret. Something that passed too quickly to name. "I believe you," he said at last, quiet. Cassie blinked. Joseph nodded approvingly. "Then it's settled?" "Sensible?" she echoed. "I want you to stay," Joseph said gently. "Just for a week, as my guest. Let my staff take care of you and Milo. Let me—" Cassie hesitated. She didn't trust luxury. She didn't trust kindness when it came wrapped in ribbon and written on gold stationery. But she looked at Milo, still smiling, swinging his feet off the edge of the chair like he belonged here, and felt her heart bend. "I'll stay," she said. "1 week." Grayson didn't say anything. But when she looked back at him, his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were watching her like a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. Chapter 3. The CEO Who Doesn't Believe in Love. Grayson Whitaker didn't believe in love. He believed in risk assessments, in quarterly reports, in the way power tilted when you stood on the 80th floor and spoke in percentages. But love? That was for people who had time to waste and illusions to chase. People who hadn't been left behind with broken expectations and betrayal, neatly disguised as affection. He'd learned the truth early. Everyone wants something. Love was just the word people used before they made their move. Which is why Cassie Monroe made no sense to him. He stood behind the tinted windows of the library in Whitaker Manor, watching her in the rose garden. She was laughing, actually laughing, as Milo chased butterflies near the koi pond. Her boots were muddy and her scarf was tied in a crooked knot, and she didn't seem to care that she didn't belong here. And yet, she fit. Grayson hated how much he noticed that. Behind him, his assistant Claire cleared her throat. "Sir, the board is asking whether you'll be attending the tech summit next Friday." "No," Grayson said without turning around. Claire blinked. That's the keynote address. Your name is printed." I said no. He turned, voice clipped. "Cancel it." Claire nodded, leaving him in silence. He stared out the window again. Cassie knelt in the grass, adjusting Milo's coat. Her fingers were gentle, her face calm, and when she looked up, she didn't know that unsettled him most of all. Later that afternoon, he found her in the East Wing hallway, standing beneath a portrait of his great-grandmother. She looked lost, but not in a helpless way, more like someone trying to memorize a place that might disappear. "This house doesn't make sense," she said when she saw him. "It's like a museum and a hotel and a church all at once." He folded his arms. "You're not far off. It's a shrine to a family name." Cassie tilted her head. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Grayson studied her. "Depends who's buried in it." A beat of silence passed between them. The chandelier above cast long shadows on the hardwood floor. Cassie tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Your grandfather's different," she said gently, "kinder than I expected." "We wasn't always," Grayson replied. "Power does strange things to men. You speak like you're not one of them." He met her gaze. "I'm not." She laughed, a soft breath of disbelief. "You run a billion-dollar company." "I don't run it," he said. "I own it. There's a difference." She looked at him like she was trying to peel back his skin to find the truth beneath. "Why did you bring us here?" she asked finally. "Really?" "I didn't," he said simply. "He did. I let it happen." Grayson exhaled slowly, his eyes colder now. "My grandfather believes in sentiment, in poetry, in giving second chances to people who don't deserve them." Her expression didn't change. "Are you saying I don't deserve this?" "I'm saying I don't believe in charity," he said, his voice harder than it needed to be. "And I don't like games." And he stepped forward, arms crossed now. "Then stop playing them. If you want us to leave, just say so." "I don't," he said, almost too quickly. Her brow furrowed. "Then what do you want?" Grayson hesitated. He wasn't used to not knowing the answer to that question. That night, Joseph hosted a private dinner. No staff, just the five of them: Grayson, Cassie, Milo, the butler Raymond, and himself. It was quiet, warm, almost strange in its simplicity. They ate roast chicken and mashed potatoes from antique china that probably hadn't been touched since Reagan was in office. Cassie smiled through it all. She talked to Raymond about books, asked Joseph about the garden, let Milo run wild with stories about how he was going to build a flying backpack that could rescue dinosaurs. Grayson didn't say much, but he watched. And somewhere between Milo's impromptu toast to my mom, who makes soup and saves hearts, and Cassie's soft thank you to Joseph for letting them stay, Grayson realized something he didn't want to admit. She wasn't trying. She just was. But that was more dangerous than any investor he'd ever faced. After dinner, Grayson walked the long hallway to his father's old office, a place he rarely entered. He opened the door, flicked on the lamp, and stood in the middle of the room, breathing in the scent of old leather and cedar. On the wall was a photo of his parents smiling, arms around each other, pretending their marriage hadn't already died. Grayson sat at the desk. He opened a drawer. Inside was a letter his mother had written before she left, the last thing she'd ever said to him. He hadn't read it in 15 years, but somehow tonight, with the sound of Milo's laughter echoing from the other wing and Cassie's voice still tangled in his thoughts, he opened it. It was only 2 lines. "Grayson, love is not weakness. It's what keeps you from turning to stone. Don't forget who you are beneath all that glass." And he closed the letter, pressed it to the desk. And for the first time in years, he felt something crack. Chapter 4. The deal that made her his. The invitation came on thick cardstock with gold edges. Cassie almost didn't open it, thinking it was another luxury ad slipped under the door of her borrowed guest room. But when she did, her breath caught. Whitaker and Langley Annual Gala. Black tie, Whitaker Ballroom, 7 p.m. Personal escort arranged, formal wear provided. She turned it over. Nothing else. No note, no explanation. But on the envelope, in heavy blue ink, her name was written by hand, not a machine. "Is this from your boss?" she asked Milo, who was currently dressed in a superhero cape made from a dish towel and jumping on the bed. He landed beside her and studied the envelope like it might explode. "It's shiny." That evening, a dress arrived. Not just a dress, a gown. Midnight blue, sleeveless, soft as breath. When she touched the fabric, she felt like it wasn't hers. Like it had been made for a woman who didn't grow up choosing between dinner and bus fare. Cassie stood in the mirror, stunned. She looked different. Not prettier, not wealthier, just seen. Like whoever chose this had somehow listened without her speaking. When the car door opened at the bottom of the Whitaker ballroom steps, camera flashes went off. She froze. "This must be a mistake," she whispered to the driver. "A mistake," he replied calmly. "He asked me to bring you here." A voice answered from behind her. "Me." Cassie turned. Grayson Whitaker was wearing black, no tie, sharp as stone, and for the first time, when he looked at her, it wasn't like a man assessing value. It was like a man who forgot how to breathe. "You look." He didn't finish the sentence. Cassie raised an eyebrow. "Expensive?" He gave a small, unexpected smile. "I was going to say inconveniently beautiful." She blinked. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his arm. Cassie hesitated, then took it. Inside, the ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and soft music. Waiters floated by with champagne flutes. Politicians, CEOs, heiresses. Everyone smelled like money. Cassie tried to stay close to Grayson, but he was constantly being pulled away. Every few minutes, someone leaned in with a handshake or whispered something that sounded like code. She stood by the floral arrangement, sipping water, watching a sea of strangers. A voice called deep, in the darkness of the car. A voice asked. She turned. Joseph Whitaker stood beside her, holding a bourbon and wearing a smile that was more sad than smug. "A little," she admitted. "That's good," he said. "Means you still remember who you are." There's a pause. "Why am I really here?" she asked softly. "I don't belong." Joseph looked at her, long and steady. "Because you're the only person my grandson has looked at like a human being in 10 years. Before she could reply, the music changed. And then a voice over the microphone. "Mr. Whitaker, would you please join us for the opening dance?" Grayson stiffened. The attention shifted to him like a spotlight. Cassie caught his hesitation and saw something else. Discomfort, even dread. For a man who ruled boardrooms, he looked like he'd rather vanish than step onto the dance floor. And so she stepped forward. "I'll dance with you," she said. His eyebrows lifted. "You don't even like me." "I like that you look terrified right now," she said. "It's comforting." He huffed out a breath, almost a laugh. Then, without another word, he offered his hand. The dance floor cleared. People watched. Cassie stepped into Grayson's arms, her fingers at his shoulder, his hand firm at her waist. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the music began, something slow, elegant, old-fashioned. "I haven't danced since my brother's wedding." "Good," he replied. "Neither have I." They moved in sync, unsure but steady. And something happened between them, something wordless. Her walls didn't fall, and his didn't either. But maybe they leaned. "You're not what I expected," she said after a while. "I usually am," he replied, "except to people who don't want anything from me." Cassie studied him. "And you think I don't?" He looked at her then, eyes sharp. "Do you?" She said. "I think you're the kind of man who sees threats in kindness, so I try not to offer you too much." He was silent. Then, "You think I'm broken?" "I think you're afraid of things that don't come with a contract." The music swelled. They danced. She didn't know who was leading anymore. Then he leaned closer. Not romantic, not flirtatious. just near enough to speak like a secret. "Let's make a deal," he murmured. Cassie blinked. "A deal?" "I'll fund your soup business. Not charity, a real investment. You run it your way, keep your name on it, grow it. My people handle the logistics." As she stared at him, "Jen," he said, "you stay at the estate for 3 more months." "Why?" He paused. "Because my grandfather's sick, and he likes you." She waited. "Because Milo reminds me what life used to feel like." He said nothing. The music faded. Around them, applause echoed softly. She stepped back, her hand still tingling from his. "I'll think about it," she said. Grayson nodded once. And in that moment, surrounded by power, drowning in chandeliers, she felt more real than she had in years. Chapter 5. The House That Didn't Feel Like Home. Cassie had never seen a bed that big in her life. It could have slept 4 people, 5 maybe, and still had room for regrets. The linens were the color of bone china, soft as whispers, and the pillows so overstuffed she didn't know whether to sleep on them or apologize for touching them. But she couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet, too perfect. No leaky faucet, no neighbor stomping overhead, no Milo breathing softly beside her. She stood by the window in Grayson's guest wing, staring out at the manicured hedges lit by moonlight. Somewhere below, the koi pond sparkled. Somewhere even further, Milo was asleep in his own room, a suite with blue curtains and a toy chest full of things he'd never asked for. It was the nicest prison she'd ever seen. She tried to remind herself this was temporary. 3 months. That was the deal. 3 months of living in the same house as a man who didn't trust her, but who had offered to invest in her future. A man who looked at her like she was a riddle he couldn't quite solve, and maybe didn't want to. And then there was Joseph. Kind. Watching. Waiting. She didn't know what he was hoping to see from all this, but it felt like the whole house was holding its breath, like she was being measured, and every smile, every word was weighed against some invisible scale. The next morning, she found Milo in the garden maze. He was sitting cross-legged under a lemon tree, his sketchbook balanced on his knees. "Morning, baby," she said, crouching beside him. He looked up with a grin. "Mommy, I figured something out." "Yeah." He turned the sketchbook toward her. It was a drawing of the Whitaker estate, the garden, the maze, even the koi pond. But instead of security gates and statues, Milo had drawn it as a castle, with vines that grew candy, and a moat filled with hot chocolate. She smiled, heart aching. "You made it magical." Milo shrugged. "It's already magical, but the people are weird." "Weird how?" "We say nice things but look sad, like they're playing dress-up on the inside." Cassie stared at him. "You're too smart." He leaned closer. "I miss your soup, Mommy." She hugged him tightly. "Me too." Later that week, the staff hosted a formal tea. Cassie was invited. She arrived in the only outfit she owned that wasn't food-stained, a pale green blouse and jeans that fit well enough. Everyone else wore silk and structure. The women looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion catalog. And when she walked in, the conversations didn't stop. They just shifted tones. She poured her own tea, but no one made space for her. Except for one woman, Savannah Langley, Grayson's ex-fiancée. Gorgeous, polished, the kind of beautiful that made people apologize without knowing why. She sat across from Cassie, legs crossed, smile sharp. "You must be the new guest," she said, voice honeyed. Cassie met her gaze. "Cassie, and you are?" "Oh, darling. I'm the girl who used to live here before you were a headline." Cassie said nothing. Savannah tilted her head. "Don't take it personally. Grayson has a habit of collecting strays." Cassie raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to scare me?" "No." Savannah sipped her tea. "Just a gentle reminder that houses like this don't keep their furniture long." That night, Cassie sat with Milo on the floor of her guest room, building a Lego spaceship. "Did you make any friends today?" he asked innocently. She paused. "Not exactly." Milo picked up a tiny figure. "That's okay. I don't like the butler either. He looks like he eats people." And Cassie laughed. The first real one all day. Then Milo reached into his little art folder and pulled out a sketch. It was simple. A picture of her, holding a ladle, standing in front of a tiny soup cart. Above it, he'd written in clumsy black letters, "My mommy is a CEO too." She blinked. "Why'd you draw this?" Milo grinned. "Because this house is weird. But you're not. You're still my favorite boss." She didn't cry. Not fully. But something in her chest cracked open. Later, she placed the sketch on the nightstand, beside the untouched tray of gourmet chocolate the maid had left. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and whispered into the dark, "I miss my life." Down the hall, Grayson poured himself a drink in the library. He stared at the fire and thought about her laugh, about how she didn't flinch when Savannah sharpened her claws, about how Milo had drawn him earlier that day, a superhero with ice powers, but a warm heart. He didn't understand her, and that was starting to feel like a problem. Chapter 6. The Love He Didn't Know He Lost. The first time Grayson Whitaker saw Cassie without her armor, she wasn't dressed for war. She was barefoot, standing in the Whitaker kitchen at midnight, wearing one of the mansion's oversized robes and staring down a pot of soup like it had insulted her mother. He had come downstairs for scotch. She didn't hear him at first. Her hair was a mess, soft around her face. Her hands moved quickly, stirring, tasting, adjusting. The kitchen staff had long since gone home, but here she was, sleeves rolled up, trying to recreate something from nothing. He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "That's not in the manual," he said quietly. Cassie jumped, nearly dropping the ladle. "Jesus, you scared me." He smirked. "You break into all kitchens at midnight." She turned back to the stove. "Couldn't sleep. The food here's complicated." "Why is that?" he asked, stepping in. "Soup." He raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't look like soup." "Because it's real," she said, taste testing again. "Not foam on a plate. Not art. Just something that reminds you who you were before life got so shiny." Grayson stepped closer. Steam rose from the pot. Something smelled like ginger and safety. "You made this at your cart, didn't you?" She nodded. "It fed people," she said softly. "Nurses after double shifts, kids after school, guys who didn't want to eat alone." He watched her for a long moment. "I forgot food could do that," he admitted. Cassie glanced at him, surprised. "Did you ever remember?" He didn't answer, just walked to the cupboard and pulled down 2 bowls. They sat at the massive island, in the center of a kitchen designed by a Michelin chef who hadn't stepped foot in it for over a year. Cassie poured the soup. Grayson took a bite and stopped. He didn't speak, but something shifted behind his eyes, like a crack letting in warm light. He kept eating. And Cassie studied him, arms crossed. "You know," she said, "you're kind of a mystery." He looked up. "That so? You speak like someone who's been disappointed too many times, but you carry yourself like no one's ever touched you." He didn't flinch. "Maybe both are true." "Then you're lonelier than you look." He set his spoon down, silent. He hesitated. "What happened to you, Grayson?" He exhaled. "What always happens. People who said they'd stay, didn't." Aaron. Influential people and business partners. One by one, they all made promises, then backed out when it cost something. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't make promises I can't keep," she said softly. "That's because you haven't failed yet." Cassie stood. "Or maybe because I don't run when things get hard." He looked up at her, then really looked, not like a man measuring a threat, but like a man realizing he'd been looking the wrong direction for years. "You walked away from everything," he said, "and still showed up with soup for a stranger." She gave a small, sad smile. "Because I've been the stranger. And no one fed me. 3 days later, everything changed. Cassie was walking down the east hallway, headed toward the garden, when she overheard voices from behind a partially closed door. And she paused. Savannah and Grayson. She doesn't belong here, Savannah hissed. You know it, I know it, the board knows it. She's a public embarrassment waiting to happen. She's not yours to talk about, Grayson snapped back. She's a single mother who sells soup, Savannah spat. You really think the world won't eat her alive the second they find out she's sleeping in a Whitaker bed? Silence. Then Grayson's voice, low and quiet. She's not sleeping in my bed, but I think about it. He froze. You can't be serious. Savannah laughed. Grayson didn't answer. Cassie stepped back, heart pounding. She didn't know what to feel. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even flattered. And she was afraid. Afraid of what it meant if he saw her. Afraid of what it meant if he didn't. That night, she made soup again. Grayson didn't come. She ate alone, in the same kitchen, holding her son's drawing like a map she couldn't read anymore. The next morning, a gift appeared outside her room. Not jewelry, not perfume. A wooden box, hand-carved, inside a single ladle. And silver, engraved, the woman who fed my heart, J.W. Grayson. She stared at it for a long time. And for the first time since arriving at Whitaker Manor, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like a question. And maybe a beginning. Matches 7. The photo that broke her. The Whitaker estate hadn't felt this alive in years. Soft jazz spilled out of the ballroom windows. Laughter danced across the patio. The summer fundraiser was the event of the season. An evening of champagne toasts, philanthropic lies, and the type of smiles that disappeared once the flashbulbs stopped. Cassie had been asked to attend, as part of the family. She wasn't sure what that meant. She had no title, no role. But Joseph had insisted. He'd even sent a dress, ivory silk, fitted at the waist, elegant but modest. Not Cinderella. More, the girl the prince overlooked, until he didn't. Milo stayed home with a nanny who'd brought crafts and bedtime stories. Cassie kissed his forehead and told herself everything would be fine. It was just one night. She arrived just after sunset, escorted by Grayson himself. And for a moment, as they walked past the cameras and through the manicured garden, his hand lightly resting on her back, it felt real. Like maybe this story could end differently. Inside the ballroom, under the chandeliers, everything sparkled. Cassie did her best to blend in. She smiled at donors, nodded politely when women in floor-length gowns asked if she was in acquisitions or design. She noticed Grayson watching her, the way his eyes didn't drift, the way he looked at her like she wasn't a placeholder but a person. But then Savannah arrived. All red lipstick and diamond glare. She walked past Cassie like she didn't exist. Cassie was about to head for the refreshments when she heard the click. Flash, laughter, whisper. She turned and froze. Across the room, a flat-screen monitor began flashing a slideshow of Whitaker family members. And then it changed. A photo. Her photo. Cassie. From 4 years ago. Messy hair, apron stained, holding a crying baby Milo, standing behind her food cart, eyes tired and afraid. A photo she didn't know had ever been taken. The room went still. A few gasps, a few chuckles, but mostly silence. Then the whispers began. Is that her? Soup girl. I'm Unculno. I'm not Lisa. I'm not Linda Bertha. Cassie's breath hitched. Grayson moved toward her, but not fast enough. Because Savannah was already there. "Oh," she said, feigning innocence. "Didn't know that would show up. The press can be so invasive." Cassie looked at her, stunned. Savannah's smile was made of knives. "But I suppose we all start somewhere, don't we?" Cassie's voice was low. "You leaked it?" Savannah leaned in. "Don't flatter yourself. No one had to look far. You were already the scandal. I just made it public." Grayson arrived then, placing himself between them. "Savannah, enough." "Alone? Come on," she purred. "You were going to let her keep playing princess without knowing what people already say behind your back?" Cassie turned to Grayson. Her voice cracked. "Did you know this photo existed?" His silence was enough. Cassie's world tilted. "Did you ever mean any of it?" she asked, voice trembling. "The deal, the dinners, the quiet moments?" "I never." "You knew who I was," she said, backing away. "You just didn't think the world would find out." "Cassie?" She was already walking. Not running, not crying, just walking like someone finally accepting a truth they'd hoped wasn't coming. Out on the terrace, the air was cool and cruel. Cassie leaned on the stone railing, fighting for breath. Her chest burned. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. Grayson's voice was low. "I didn't know the photo would show, I swear." "But you knew it existed." A beat of silence. "I saw it once," he admitted. "Years ago, in a donor file." She closed her eyes. "We never told me." "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "Not anymore." "It did to me, Grayson." Her voice broke now. "I let you see parts of me no one else has. I let my son call this place home. I let you mean something." He stepped closer. "You do mean something." She shook her head. "Then why didn't you protect me?" He didn't answer. Cassie turned, one tear sliding down her cheek. "Don't worry," she said. "This fairy tale ends exactly how it should." She walked away. Joseph found her in the driveway, coat thrown over her shoulders, barefoot. "Cassie," he said gently, "don't go like this." She looked up at him, and for the first time her voice was tired. Not angry, not broken. Just tired. "Your family didn't break me," she whispered. "But it didn't save me either." She opened the car door and didn't look back. Chapter 8. The DNA test. The office was small, clinical. The walls were lined with smiling stock photos of parents and children, all perfect teeth and pastel cardigans. None of them looked like Cassie. She sat on the edge of a chair in the waiting room of Golden State Diagnostics, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The envelope was already sealed, sitting beside her like a bomb made of paper and ink. Across from her, Milo kicked his feet, humming under his breath, still holding the drawing he'd made that morning. A rocket ship with the words, "Me plus mommy equals always," scrawled in red crayon. He had no idea what this was, just that she had said, "We're going to do something important today." Joseph Whitaker had called her that morning. He didn't beg. He didn't bribe. He simply said, "Let's make the truth undeniable." 3 days earlier, after the fundraiser, Cassie had packed everything, and she hadn't waited for her apologies. Grayson never called. Joseph did. He visited her small rented apartment with fresh soup and a simple envelope. "Do this," he said gently. "Not for him, for you, for your son. End the noise." Cassie didn't agree right away. But she didn't say no. Now, the nurse emerged with a calm smile and 2 forms. "Thank you, Miss Monroe. Results will be processed in 48 hours. You can request a sealed copy, or we can forward it to the legal contact you listed." Cassie nodded, numb. "The lawyer will handle it." Milo tugged at her sleeve. "Can we get ice cream now?" She smiled, tight-lipped. "Sure, baby. Let's go get something sweet." 2 days later, the results arrived. Cassie opened them alone on the back steps of her apartment. The envelope was thick, official. Her hands trembled as she read. Paternity match, 99.999%. Name, Milo Monroe. Biological father, Grayson Whitaker. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply folded the page and whispered to herself, "Now it's yours to carry." The next morning, she hand-delivered a copy to Joseph's estate. The butler didn't ask questions. He just nodded and disappeared down the marble hallway. 3 hours later, her phone rang. Grayson? She didn't answer. That evening, he showed up at her apartment. No suit. No driver. Just him, rain-drenched, quiet, unsure. Cassie opened the door halfway. Nothing more. Grayson looked like a man who'd finally seen the price of silence. "Who knew?" she said quietly. "I suspected." He shook his head. "I didn't think I had the right." Cassie's voice was steel. "You had the responsibility." A beat of silence passed. "Milo is mine," he said, voice soft. She nodded. "Yes, he is. I'd like to know him." Cassie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And what about me?" His jaw tightened. "Do you want to know me now, that it's printed on a piece of paper?" "I never stopped wanting to," he said. "I just didn't know how." Cassie exhaled. "I don't need your money," she said. "I don't need your estate or your name." "I know. Milo deserves to know who he is, and you," she paused, "you deserve to earn your way in." He looked up at her then, and for the first time his eyes weren't cold. They were raw, human, scared. "I want to," he said. She nodded. "Then start by showing up." That weekend, Grayson arrived with no fanfare, no press, just a soccer ball and 2 cups of hot chocolate. He sat on the grass with Milo for hours, listening to his stories about space and dragons and how soup could probably cure aliens too. Cassie watched from the porch, coffee in hand. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she didn't close the door, either. 2 weeks later, Joseph hosted a private dinner. No cameras, no guests. Just the 3 of them. Grayson brought the DNA test and placed it at the center of the table. "I don't need proof," Joseph said softly. "I just need your heart to be in the right place." "It is," Grayson replied. He sipped her wine, eyes unreadable. Joseph looked between them and said, "Then let's stop pretending we're strangers." Outside, after dinner, under the stars, Grayson walked Cassie to her car. "I want to do more," he said. "For Milo. For you." Cassie looked up. "You don't owe me anything." He took a breath. "Then let me choose to give anyway." And before she could respond, he reached into his coat and handed her something. It was Milo's drawing, framed. Underneath, a new line had been added, written in neat block letters. "Me plus mommy plus daddy equals always." Cassie felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking. Open. Chapter 9. The fight for her name. The boardroom at Whitaker Industries was built like a throne room, all steel, glass, and intimidation. The long table reflected the rain-streaked skyline of San Francisco, and along its polished surface sat 12 people who didn't smile unless something was being acquired. Cassie stood at one end of the room. No title. No power. No armor except the truth. At the other end sat Savannah Langley, calm and smiling, surrounded by her legal team and perfectly manicured lies. Her voice was syrup-sweet as she spoke into. "I'm suggesting," Savannah said, gesturing gracefully, "is that the company consider the implications of associating with someone of public inexperience." She looked at Cassie like she was gum on a ballroom shoe. "This isn't about character," she added. "It's about optics. Our shareholders deserve better than a back-alley soup vendor raising the air." Cassie didn't flinch. Grayson did. He stood. "You've made your point, Savannah." "Have I?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "Because I believe your silence is starting to look like agreement." Cassie stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, but the room shifted when she spoke. "My name is Cassie Monroe. I started a soup cart because no one would hire a single mother with no college degree. I fed night shift nurses, janitors, elderly couples who lived off Social Security and shared meals. I never had a boardroom, but I built something with my hands and it mattered." A pause. Then she lifted the folder she'd brought with her. Inside, the framed DNA results, Milo's drawing, and a photo. Her and Milo at the soup cart, laughing, covered in flour and love. She laid them on the table. This isn't about optics. This is about fear. Yours, not mine. Fear that someone without your last name might still have worth, that the truth might live outside your press releases. The room was quiet. Dead quiet. Savannah's lips curled. What do you want, Miss Monroe? Cassie looked her dead in the eye. I want my name back. She turned to the board. For months, I was your secret, your PR risk, your placeholder. But I am the mother of Grayson Whitaker's child. I am the woman your founder trusted with his life, and I am not going to shrink because the room is bigger than I'm used to. One of the directors cleared his throat. Miss Monroe? Cassie cut him off. It's Ms. Monroe, and I'm not asking for permission anymore. Grayson stepped beside her then, not in front, not to protect, just beside her. Anyone here has a problem with that, he said. They can bring it to me. Joseph's voice came from the doorway. I can bring it to me too. Everyone turned. The room didn't just shift. It bent. Joseph Whitaker walked in without a coat, face weathered but eyes sharp. He looked older than the last time most of them had seen him, but somehow more permanent than any of them would ever be. She gave my grandson back his soul, he said. She gave me back my hope, and if anyone here thinks that makes her a liability, you're welcome to resign. Savannah paled. No one else spoke. Cassie took a breath, and for the first time in months, it didn't rattle. After the meeting, in the hallway, Grayson caught her hand. I should have defended you sooner, he said quietly. She looked up at him. Then defend me now. Every day, not just when the cameras are on. I will, he said, not as damage control, as proof. What? He smiled, faint. That I finally believe in the woman I almost lost. She didn't kiss him. But she didn't let go either. Later that night, back at the apartment, Milo ran into her arms with news from school and a sticker on his shirt that read, Kindness Captain. Cassie knelt beside him. I had to tell some people who I am today, she said. Milo tilted his head. What'd you say? She smiled. I said I'm your mom. Duh, he grinned. They should already know that. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Was Never Just a Wife. The house felt different now. It wasn't the furniture or the light, though the morning sun through the Whitaker windows looked softer than before. It wasn't even the new sketch taped to the refrigerator drawn by Milo in bright crayon. Me plus mommy plus daddy equals A-team. It was her. Cassie Monroe stood in the foyer of Whitaker Manor, wearing jeans, sneakers, and the confidence of someone who no longer apologized for being underestimated. She wasn't the soup girl anymore. She was the woman who'd walked back in, not because she had to, but because she chose to. And she hadn't made her decision yet. Grayson stood across from her, silent, waiting. His tie was loose, his expression unreadable. I'm not a symbol, Cassie said quietly. I'm not your redemption arc or your grandfather's experiment. I know that. Will you? He stepped forward, slow. I didn't choose you because it was convenient, Cassie. I chose you because the house never felt like home until your laugh was in the hallway. Because Milo isn't just my son. He's the reason I started believing in second chances again. But you're the reason I want to become someone worthy of one. She folded her arms, though her heart was thudding. That's a nice speech. It's not a speech. It's a start. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. She stepped back. Nathaniel said gently but firm, If this is a proposal, it's the wrong time. He paused. Then tell me when the right time is. We're not standing in your world, she said, but beside it, when I've rebuilt mine. Grayson swallowed. I can wait. Good, she replied, because I'm not going to spend my life being saved. I never wanted to save you, he said. I just want to stand next to the woman who saved herself. Weeks passed. Cassie opened her first small cafe near the edge of the financial district. Soup and kindness, her name on the window, Milo's table. Grayson came every Sunday. He didn't ask questions, he just sat in the corner booth, helped Milo with homework, and washed dishes when they were short-staffed. Cassie noticed the small things. He didn't bring flowers, he brought fresh ginger when hers ran low. He didn't promise forever, he promised to listen. And he kept showing up. Not as a CEO, but as a man with sleeves rolled up and eyes that stopped looking past her and started looking at her. One night, months later, she stepped out onto the cafe sidewalk, where he was waiting with takeout containers and 2 paper cups of soup. "Want to walk?" he asked. They wandered through the city in silence, just like they'd done before they'd ever been anyone. At the pier, she leaned on the railing, the wind brushing her hair back. Grayson handed her one of the cups. Chicken noodle. She sipped it. "Too much salt." "I'm learning." "You're stubborn." He smiled. "So are you." They fell quiet again. And then he said it, not in a rush, not with expectation. Just like an offering. "I love you, Cassie." She didn't look at him right. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I know." Then, "Ask me again, not tonight, but someday, when I'm ready to say yes as a woman who doesn't need to be chosen because she's already chosen herself." He nodded and took her hand. No ring, just her fingers in his. Equal, the table where she belonged. In the end, it was never about the mansion. It wasn't about the cufflink or the money or even the name Whitaker printed on glass towers above the city. It was about a bowl of soup. And bowl, given without hesitation, without knowing the man who would receive it, once sat at the head of an empire. She gave it because someone was hungry, and that was enough. That's what love looks like, before the world complicates it. Before contracts and headlines, before legacy and leverage. Not just one human feeding another. Cassie Monroe never became a socialite, never wore a tiara, never headlined a magazine. But she'd built something of her own, a small cafe with chipped mugs and real warmth, where strangers became family, and no one asked where you came from before asking how you were. Milo grew up with both of them, one hand sketching superheroes, the other always reaching for the truth. He never called them rich or poor, just lucky. Grayson didn't save her. He stood beside her. He learned to hold the silence instead of fill it, to kneel only when it was time, and he learned slowly, deliberately, that trust is something you earn every day with your hands, not your promises. They didn't get married right away. It was no public proposal, no viral moment. Just a quiet Sunday morning, years later, when he poured her coffee, kissed the back of her neck and said, "If you say yes, it'll never be because I offered. It'll be because you decided it was your time." And she did. When she was ready. And her name wasn't a risk, but a foundation. When she looked in the mirror and didn't see a guest in someone else's story, but the woman who'd written her own. We talk a lot about love in fairy tales. But the real kind? It doesn't knock down doors or come wrapped in roses. Sometimes it's just a woman, tired but still standing, handing a stranger her last bowl of soup and asking nothing in return. Sometimes it's a man, learning to unlearn everything he thought made him powerful. Sometimes it's a little boy drawing a family into existence long before the world gives them permission to be one. So if you've ever been overlooked or underestimated, if you've ever loved someone who wasn't ready or lost someone who didn't know your worth, the story was for you. Not because you need a mansion, but because maybe, just maybe, you've always deserved a seat at the table, even if you had to build it yourself. Have you ever given something without expecting anything back? Or been judged before someone knew your story? We'd love to hear how kindness or truth changed your life. And tell us in the comments below. Because real love doesn't always look like a headline. Sometimes it just looks like soup.